It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all.
Okay.
Al, we start with you this time. I'm sure you saw the polls that I did this week, where I guess two at least showed significant advantages by DeSantis against Trump in a hypothetical race. This is an interesting bit of political news, even for a Democrat. Should the Democrats be worried about a DeSantis candidacy at this point?
Well, I'm not exactly shaking in my boots. These early polls are always interesting, seldom mean much. When was it? Was it 2008 when Rudy Giuliani was the certain nominee of the Republican Party at this point? I think, frankly, DeSantis' candidacy has a long-term future. I might be wrong about that, but I think he looks a lot better now than he's going to look a year from now. He's trying to be a mini Trump, and Trump's in great disfavor. And I saw one poll where his approval rating's down to 31%, and he's fallen like a rock. So the contrast with Trump helps Dukakis. As Trump fades, Dukakis ceases to be a really viable candidate, then DeSantis is going to have to depend on his own record and his own merits. You hear a lot of things about how people want Trump's policies, but they just don't want Trump.
Right.
Well, the fact is, Trump has no policies. He didn't even have a platform. Trump has functioned on antics, not policy, and he's tapped a lot of anger in the country. So I think when people say they want to continue Trump's policies without Trump, it really doesn't mean anything. My guess is none of them know what his policies were in the first place. DeSantis is still undefined, and as Craig knows, when you go into a presidential campaign, you get vetted and defined. And Craig's one of the experts on defining his opponents. Is something that works for his candidate. So far, DeSantis has really tried the Trump model. He's dependent on, antics but all the things that he does to build support in the Republican Party are sort of like Trump does. They sort of limit his ability to move outside. And so, sending immigrants to Martha's Vineyard, attacking Disney, being anti-gay rights. Now today he's coming out after being, I saw a bunch of clips this morning on Morning Joe that how he was encouraging people to get vaccinated. Now he's coming out with an anti-vax committee. I mean, basically he's playing to the hard right Trump base. And that's fine, 2 years before an election. But the problem with the Trump base, as we saw in the last election, is when you play to it, you scare off voters you need to win in the general election. We saw that in the Senate races and a lot of key governor's races this time. There's a Trump tax. Trump that cost Republican voters 5%, or Trump candidates 5% in this last election. Dukakis seems to be, that's one tax Dukakis seems, or DeSantis. I keep getting them mixed up because I think they're going to have the same fate. But DeSantis is likely, that's one tax DeSantis is likely to increase.
Frank, Al raises some good points, but on the other hand, we both live in the same area. There are a lot of Republicans I know that actually have second homes in Florida. They are very high on Ron DeSantis and see this as a good alternative. What are you picking up?
Yeah, I think so. I think you have to remember at this point, kind of as I was saying, it's very early, and a lot of this attention in these polls goes to name identification, and name identification is a product of who the media is focused on. And right now, they're very focused on Ron DeSantis. I think Governor DeSantis is kind of the stalking horse, if you will, for people looking for the Trump alternative. Many don't know a lot about him, but he's the alternative that they've heard most about. In fact, and I discovered it, I think, in the Wall Street Journal, but a poll of likely Republican voters has DeSantis still a little bit behind Trump. Now, that might be timing. Trump's numbers have plummeted. But the most interesting thing to me was that two things. One, who had the higher negatives? Because if you're starting now with high negatives, you've got a real uphill climb as the media puts more and more attention on candidates. And no surprise maybe, but Trump, Pence, and interesting, Liz Cheney have the highest negatives among Republicans who are likely to vote. And those who think, well, maybe Liz Cheney is our answer, I would say that she could be, but she's got a real mountain to climb to get through those negatives. The other interesting part of it was candidates that we may talk about or speculate about come into this right now with very high unknowns. 28% in this survey of likely Republican voters say they haven't heard of Nikki Haley, for example. 29% say they haven't heard of Governor Greg Abbott, for example. 37% haven't heard of Greg Scott. Mike Pompeo is at 17%. A lot have heard about him, but 29% can't really voice an opinion one way or another about him. So to me, this validates this notion that it's still very much early days, even in this primary process. And the fact of the matter is all of these individuals will be vying for attention from potential support groups, from donors, from the media, and they've got a good year in which to go do that. I did see today that the Trump advisors are now saying he's not going to do so many of these rallies, like that wasn't working out so well. He's going to focus more on policy issues. And by the way, I think that advice is great advice. It's exactly what Governor DeSantis and the others should be doing. Look at policy issues, go meet with groups. It's what Governor George W. Bush did when he was governor of Texas. He became president. I remember people coming back from those meetings with then Governor George W. Bush saying how really astounded they were at how knowledgeable he was about energy policy or education policy. And a couple things about that. First of all, George W. Bush had the discipline to review documents, to think through his position on things, and then to speak about them with some degree of knowledge. Trump has never suggested he has the ability to do those things. And so I think you've got strategists and paid advisors who are giving Trump a strategy. I just would be surprised if he has the discipline to stick with it. Although I think it's good advice, and I think it's probably what these other Republicans are doing, and time will tell. By the way, this is all about winning primaries. And so you've got to go to places like Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and begin to build organizations and build support. And it's a very busy time for them, but we're not going to, most of us aren't going to see a lot of them, at least around Maryland, for the next few months.
Al, I do want to switch channels and get back to our continuous series of covering Kevin McCarthy's woes. He's still trying to figure out where he can get enough votes to become the Speaker of the House. It seems like the conservatives are asking him to accept what would be basically a flash election that would take him out of that office within a day if they disagree with his policies. You probably are enjoying some of this, but I'd love to hear your take.
Well, first of all, I just want to remind our viewers that I just got back from Israel and Jerusalem yesterday, and so I haven't been following every intricacy of the speaker's race, but as you described it, it's very clear McCarthy doesn't have the votes to be speaker, and his efforts to get those votes is likely to make him a weaker speaker, likely to have him walking on eggshells, likely to get him in constant opposition with, or put him constantly at odds with Mitch McConnell. and make it very difficult for the House to pass any legislation that is constructive. And the thing that most interesting about McCarthy is that his problem is not just the members who oppose him. I think his greater problem may be the members who support him. I think what you were alluding to was a letter that a number of members, I think 7 or so, of the Freedom Caucus sent him recently that had a whole host of crazy demands on him for the speakership, including a rule that basically allows them to depose the speaker in midstream whenever they want to. And that's a rule that I apparently used to help force out John Boehner. His problem is he needs their votes. He needs those votes, and there's also a small group of moderates on the other side whose votes he needs. So he's going to have to figure out how to deal with that. I mean, you got to remember that more than 30 members of the Republican conference voted against McCarthy as being their nominee for speaker. So he's got some real trouble. But even more troubling than the people who are voting against him now that he's got to win is that Marjorie Taylor Greene is among his strongest supporters. And she seems confident that he's going to do whatever bidding she wants. And with as much opposition as he now has in the Freedom Caucus, he may well need her. I mean, she may well actually be a key to bringing some of those people back into voting for McCarthy. So you'd have to. So here's what you'd have. You'd have the most extreme, most conspiracy promoting member of the House, a member of the House who the House stripped of her committees because of her behavior, outrageous behavior. That member could be pulling a lot of the strings in the next caucus, or at least with the speaker, in a caucus that's going to have 158 election deniers. So she has a good marketplace to play in. We're already seeing the consequences of the McCarthy's efforts in this effort over this week, which I think will be successful. I think we'll finally pass a bill to fund the government, but it's not because of McCarthy. McCarthy, because he needs the votes of the nutcases in his caucus, wants them to vote against him. This is a bipartisan bill in the Senate. They had an agreement. Mitch McConnell's agent, Richard Shelby, has negotiated it. But McCarthy, because he's afraid people, if he actually did something constructive to get the government going, that he would lose support in the speaker's race, has got to be against it. I just came back from Israel, and Bibi Netanyahu is now trying to put together an Israeli government. He's now in his final extension. You get a 10-day period, or a period, and then you can get a couple of more 5-day extensions. And his second 5-day extension. The reason he's in trouble is because he has some crazy people who are in the cabinet who keep making outrageous demands. And one of them is that you got to let convicted criminals be in the cabinet. And this is Bibi's biggest vote ever. He's got 64 members. Kevin McCarthy probably won't have to worry about having convicted criminals being in his leadership team, even though you don't know. That's still up in the air. But he's likely to have to depend on some in the House who may very well be charged in the January 6th riot for votes. So I guess maybe I'm coming back to a calmer situation than I was watching in Israel, but I just think what we've seen on this government funding bill is just the tip of the iceberg of what we're going to see over the next 2 years.
Craig, the troubles of Kevin?
The troubles continue, and I agree with Al's analysis. I would only add that You know, Kevin McCarthy has had his eye on this ball of the speakership for many, many years. I do believe that he'll do anything to become speaker. The problem is he can't do everything because certain actions cancel out votes, you know, when one side or the other. And he's caught in this bind. He doesn't, I don't think, see a way out of this. Some of his own supporters are quietly beginning to say they don't see how he gets there. I do think that Al is right, that the people that are staying with him longest are problematic. And I really wonder, and I doubt we'll ever see it. I'd love to see the list of promises that they've extracted. It goes not only obviously to procedural issues, it goes to things they want to bring to the floor, investigations they want to hold, funding they want for their districts. You know, he is doing anything he can do to win over these votes, but it's not coming together. And I guess the biggest question, and pulling a little bit from Al's recent travels, is will we actually see for the first time in decades some kind of coalition in the House? Can you get Republicans and Democrats to get to that number they need to elect a speaker and go around McCarthy? It's far from decided as far as I can tell, and the path forward for McCarthy looks more uncertain every day to me.
Well, we have to leave it there. Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thank you so much, and happy holidays. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.